Your rent went up again. It's the third year in a row. You're now paying $1,800 a month for the same apartment that cost you $1,400 3 years ago. That's $400 more every single month for the exact same place. Same kitchen with the oven that doesn't heat evenly. Same bathroom with the loose toilet handle you've reported twice. Same carpet that was already worn when you moved in. Nothing has improved. Nothing has been added, but the price keeps climbing. You ask your landlord why, and they give you some vague answer about market rates and rising costs. You check your pay stubs. 3 years ago you were making $50,000 a year. Now you're making $53,000. Your income went up 6%. Your rent went up 28%. The math doesn't work. You're falling behind, and you know it. If you've ever felt like you're working harder and getting poorer, like the cost of housing is consuming more and more of your life, like there's no way to ever get ahead because rent keeps eating everything, this video is for you. Because your landlord is doing math that you're not doing. They're playing a completely different game than you are. And until you understand their math, you can't understand why your rent keeps rising, even though nothing about your apartment has changed. Let me tell you what this feels like, because if you rent, you already know. You budget carefully. You track every expense. You cut back on eating out, on subscriptions, on anything you can trim. You're responsible. You're doing everything the personal finance gurus tell you to do. And still, every year, rent takes a bigger slice. 3 years ago, rent was 35% of your gross income. Now it's 41%. The recommended maximum is 30%. You're way over. You know you should save more, invest more, build wealth. But after rent, after utilities, after food and transportation, and student loans and everything else, there's nothing left. You're not living extravagantly. You're living in a one-bedroom apartment in a decent but not fancy neighborhood. You're taking the bus. You're buying groceries at the discount store. You're not the problem. But every year, your landlord sends you a lease renewal with a higher number, and you sign it because what else are you going to do? Moving costs money. First and last month's rent, security deposit, moving truck, time off work. You'd have to come up with $4,000 just to move into a new place that will probably raise the rent next year too. So you stay, and you pay more. And you fall further behind. Here's what makes it worse. You know your landlord isn't struggling. You see them driving a nice car when they come to collect rent checks or inspect the property. You know they own multiple properties. You know they're making money off you. But you don't fully understand how much or why. You think they're raising your rent to cover their costs. Property taxes went up a little, insurance went up a little, maybe maintenance costs. So they pass those costs to you with a little extra on top for profit. That seems reasonable, even if it's painful. But that's not what's happening. Your landlord isn't raising your rent to cover costs. They're raising your rent because they can. Because the market allows it. Because housing prices are going up, and they're capturing that appreciation through rent increases. And here's the part that makes you feel crazy. While you're paying more and more for the same apartment, your landlord's apartment, the actual asset, is getting more and more valuable. They bought this building 10 years ago for $400,000. It's now worth $700,000. They've gained $300,000 in wealth just from holding the asset. And they used your rent payments to cover the mortgage and expenses while that appreciation happened. You paid their mortgage. You funded their wealth accumulation. And now you're paying even more because the asset you'll never own has become more valuable. Here's what your landlord sees when they look at your apartment. They see an asset that generates cash flow and appreciates in value. They bought the building with a mortgage. Let's say they put down $80,000 and borrowed $320,000. Their mortgage payment is maybe $1,800 per month. They rent out 4 units at $1,400 each when they first buy the building. That's $5,600 in rental income. After mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance, They may be breaking even or making a small profit. But they're not doing this for the monthly profit. They're doing it because every month, you and the other tenants are paying down their mortgage principal. You're buying them equity. And every year, the building is worth more. If property values go up 5% per year, a $400,000 building is worth $420,000 after 1 year, $441,000 after 2 years. After 10 years, it's worth $650,000. Your landlord's equity has gone from $80,000 to $350,000. They've made $270,000 in wealth accumulation, and you paid for it. Your rent covered the mortgage that built their equity. Your rent covered the costs while the asset appreciated. And now, 10 years later, your landlord looks at that building and thinks, this asset is worth $650,000. I should be extracting more cash flow from it. So they raise your rent. Not because their costs went up by $400 per month, but because the asset is worth more and the market will bear higher rent. Let me show you the math from both sides, because this is where it gets clear. Your math as a renter. You pay $1,800 per month in rent. Over a year, that's $21,600. Over 10 years, that's $216,000. At the end of 10 years, you have paid $216,000 and you own nothing. You have no equity. You have no asset. You've traded your income for housing, which is necessary, but you've built zero wealth from it. Every dollar you paid in rent is gone. It bought you a place to live, which has value, but it didn't build your net worth. Your landlord's math. They bought a $400,000 building with $80,000 down and a $320,000 mortgage at 4% interest. Their mortgage payment is about $1,500 per month. They have 4 units. If we're tracking just your unit, your $1,400 rent covers almost all the mortgage payment allocated to your unit. Over 10 years, you've paid them $168,000 in rent. They've paid about $180,000 in mortgage payments for the whole building, $45,000 of which is allocated to your unit. Your rent covered that mortgage payment. But more importantly, over those 10 years, the building went from $400,000 to $650,000. That's $250,000 in appreciation. Your landlord's net worth increased by $250,000, plus the equity they built by paying down the mortgage. They probably have $400,000 in equity now on a building they bought with $80,000. That's $320,000 in wealth created. And your rent funded it. You paid $216,000 over 10 years and own nothing. They collected rent from you and 3 other tenants, paid down a mortgage, watched the property appreciate, and now have $320,000 in wealth. Different math. Different game. Now let's add the rent increase to this picture. After 10 years, your landlord decides to raise your rent from $1,400 to $1,800. Why? Their mortgage payment didn't change. It's a fixed-rate mortgage, still $1,500 per month. Property taxes maybe went up $100 per year. Insurance went up $50. Maintenance costs are roughly the same. There's no $400 per month increase in expenses. So why the rent increase? Because the building is worth more, and landlords price rent based on asset value, not costs. They look at what similar properties are renting for. Those properties have also appreciated. The landlords of those properties also raised rent. Everyone is raising rent because property values went up. And property values went up partly because rents went up, which justified higher property values, which justified higher rents. It's a feedback loop. And you're stuck in it. Your landlord raises your rent to $1,800 because that's what the market will bear. You can't afford to move. Other renters can't afford to move, so you all pay the increase. Your landlord now collects $7,200 per month from 4 units instead of $5,600. That's an extra $1,600 per month, $19,000 per year in cash flow. Their costs didn't go up $19,000 per year. This is pure extraction. It's capturing the appreciation of the asset through rent increases. And it's completely legal. It's how the rental market works. Here's the concept you need to understand. Asset appreciation versus income stagnation. Your income, if you're lucky, grows at maybe 3% per year to keep pace with general inflation. Some years you get no raise. Some years you get 2%. Over 10 years, your income might grow 20 to 30% total. But housing prices and therefore rents have been growing at 5 to 7% per year in many markets. Over 10 years, that's 60 to 90% growth. Your income is growing linearly and slowly. Housing costs are growing exponentially and fast. The gap between what you earn and what housing costs keeps widening. And here's why. Your income is based on your labor value in the labor market. Your raise is determined by what your employer is willing to pay for your work. That's somewhat competitive, but wages have been stagnant for decades. Housing costs are based on asset values in the real estate market. Those values are determined by investors, speculators, supply and demand, interest rates, and financialization. Housing isn't priced based on what you can afford. It's priced based on what investors think the asset is worth. These are two completely different systems, operating on different logics, growing at different rates. And renters are caught in the gap. You're earning wages in a stagnant labor market while paying for housing in an appreciating asset market. The math cannot work in your favor. Let's go deeper. Why are housing prices appreciating faster than incomes? There are structural reasons. First, supply constraint. Most cities have restrictive zoning laws that limit where and how much housing can be built. Single-family zoning, height restrictions, parking requirements, lengthy approval processes. All of these limit the supply of housing. When demand for housing grows, either because the population is growing or because more people want to live in a city, and supply can't keep pace, prices go up. This is basic economics. But here's the thing. These zoning laws aren't neutral. They're often advocated for by existing homeowners who want to protect their property values. More housing supply would mean more competition, which would put downward pressure on prices and rents. Existing homeowners don't want that. They want their asset to appreciate. So they support policies that restrict supply, which drives up values. Renters pay the price in higher rents. Homeowners gain wealth from appreciation. The system is designed to benefit asset owners at the expense of renters. Second, financialization of housing. Housing used to be owned primarily by individuals and small landlords. Now an increasing share is owned by corporations, real estate investment trusts, and private equity firms. These entities buy properties as investments. They're not buying to provide housing. They're buying to extract returns. They use sophisticated pricing algorithms to maximize rent. They have economies of scale that allow them to outbid individual buyers. They have access to cheap capital that individuals don't. And they have a fiduciary duty to their investors to maximize profits, which means raising rents as much as the market will tolerate. When you're renting from a corporate landlord, you're not dealing with a person who might show some flexibility or compassion. You're dealing with an algorithm optimized for profit extraction. Your rent goes up because a spreadsheet says it should. And because these corporations own thousands of units, they can influence the entire market. If one major corporate landlord raises rents 5%, other landlords see that and follow. It sets a floor. The market rate rises because the big players raised it. Third, interest rates and investment incentives. For the past 15 years, interest rates have been historically low. This has made real estate an attractive investment. You can borrow money cheaply to buy properties, rent them out, and earn returns that beat bonds or savings accounts. Investors have flooded into real estate, bidding up prices. Higher prices mean landlords need to charge higher rents to justify the purchase price and generate returns. And when interest rates do go up, like they did recently, it doesn't make housing cheaper. It makes mortgages more expensive, which means fewer people can afford to buy. which means more people rent, which increases demand for rentals, which allows landlords to raise rents. It's a trap both ways. Low rates drive up prices. High rates drive people into renting, which drives up rents. Renters lose either way. Fourth, housing as a commodity versus housing as a human need. You need a place to live. It's not optional. You will pay what you have to pay because the alternative is homelessness. Landlords know this. The demand for housing is inelastic. People can't just choose not to have housing. This gives landlords pricing power. In a normal market, if a product gets too expensive, people buy less of it, demand drops, and prices fall. But you can't buy less housing. You can downsize, you can get roommates, but you still need a place to live. This means landlords can keep raising prices until renters literally cannot pay anymore. And even then, there's always someone who will pay, or someone who will double up and split the rent. The market doesn't correct because the product is a necessity. And when housing is treated as an investment asset rather than a human right, the incentives are to extract maximum profit from a captive market. That's you. You're the captive market. Fifth, the wealth gap and generational transfer. Older generations, baby boomers and Gen X, were able to buy homes when prices were lower relative to incomes. They've benefited from decades of appreciation. Many of them now own multiple properties and rent them out. They're using the wealth they accumulated from rising home values to buy more property, which drives prices up further, which makes it harder for younger generations to buy. Meanwhile, millennials and Gen Z are renting because they can't afford down payments on houses that cost 8 to 10 times their annual income. The median home price used to be about 3 times median income. Now it's 6 to 8 times in many markets. That shift happened because housing became an investment vehicle for wealth accumulation. And the people who got in early are now the landlords charging you more rent every year. It's a generational wealth transfer. Your rent is paying for their retirement. Sixth, tax policy. Landlords get tax benefits that renters don't. They can deduct mortgage interest, property taxes, repairs, maintenance, and even depreciation on the building. These deductions reduce their taxable income, which means they pay less in taxes. Meanwhile, you're paying rent with after-tax dollars and getting no deductions at all. The tax code is designed to favor property owners. It encouraged people to buy rental property because it's tax-advantaged. This increases demand for investment properties, which drives up prices, which drives up rents. You're competing against investors who have tax advantages you don't have. The game is rigged from the start, so where does this leave you? You're earning wages that grow slowly. You're paying rent that grows fast. You're funding your landlord's wealth accumulation while building none of your own. You're trapped in a system where housing is treated as an investment asset, not a place to live, and you're the cash flow that makes that investment profitable. What are you supposed to do? The standard advice is buy a house. Build equity, stop paying rent. And yes, if you can buy, you should. But let's be realistic about why most people can't. You need a down payment. 20% of a $400,000 house is $80,000. If you're paying $1,800 in rent and barely breaking even every month, how are you supposed to save $80,000? You're not. Or you can buy with 3 or 5% down through an FHA loan. But then you're paying mortgage insurance, and your monthly payment might be higher than your rent, and you're taking on all the risk and cost of maintenance and repairs. And you need good credit and stable employment, and the ability to pass underwriting. Many renters can't check all those boxes, not because they're irresponsible, but because the system has made homeownership inaccessible. So if you can't buy right now, what can you do? First, understand what's happening. You're not failing. The math is rigged against you. Your landlord is playing an investment game where they accumulate wealth through appreciation, and you fund it through rent. Knowing this doesn't change your rent, but it changes how you think about your situation. You're not bad with money. You're on the wrong side of an asset appreciation cycle. Second, minimize rent as much as possible without sacrificing safety or your ability to work. This might mean living further from city centers, having roommates, downsizing. Every dollar you save on rent is a dollar you can save toward eventually buying or investing elsewhere. Third, if you have any extra money, invest it. You can't buy a house yet, but you can buy stocks or index funds. You need to be participating in asset appreciation somewhere. Your landlord is building wealth through real estate appreciation. You need to be building wealth through something, even if it's small. 10% of your income in a retirement account, or $100 per month in an index fund, is better than nothing. The gap between renters and owners is the gap between people who own appreciating assets and people who don't. Own something, even if it's not real estate. Fourth, organize with other renters. Renters' unions, tenant associations, advocacy groups. Individually, you have no power against landlords. Collectively, you do. Organize for rent control, for tenant protections, for policies that limit rent increases. Corporate landlords hate this. They'll tell you rent control reduces housing supply, creates inefficiencies, hurts the market. They're protecting their profits. Rent control isn't perfect, but it's better than unregulated rent increases that price people out of their homes. Fifth, vote for policies that increase housing supply and regulate landlords. Zoning reform that allows more dense housing. Affordable housing mandates. Restrictions on corporate ownership of single-family homes. Higher taxes on investment properties. These policies shift power from landlords to renters. They won't happen unless renters demand them. Landlords and homeowners will fight them because those policies reduce their wealth. But housing should be about providing shelter, not maximizing investment returns. Vote for candidates who prioritize housing affordability over property values. Sixth, if you're in a position to buy, even if it's not your dream home, do it. A small condo, a townhouse, something. Get into the market. Start building equity. Stop funding someone else's appreciation. This isn't possible for everyone, and that's okay. But if you can scrape together a down payment, if you can get a loan, if you can make the numbers work, buy. Even a modest property that appreciates at 5% per year will build wealth faster than renting. You might have to buy further out. You might have to compromise on space or location. But owning a less than perfect property is better than renting forever. The math is clear. Homeowners build wealth. Renters pay for that wealth building. Get on the ownership side of that equation if you possibly can. Seventh, understand that this is political. The reason your rent keeps rising isn't just market forces. It's policy choices. We chose to allow unlimited corporate ownership of housing. We chose to keep interest rates low for investors. We chose to restrict housing supply through zoning. We chose to give tax breaks to landlords. We chose to treat housing as an investment rather than a human right. Every one of these choices has benefited property owners and hurt renters. And every one can be changed. Housing policy is local. City councils, county boards, state legislatures. These are the places where zoning gets decided, where rent control gets debated, where housing policy gets made. Show up, testify, vote, run for office if you can. The people making housing policy are often homeowners and landlords. They're not renters. They don't feel your pain. They benefit from the status quo. You have to fight to change it. Here's the truth. Your landlord's math and your math are fundamentally different because you're playing different games. You're trying to afford a place to live. They're trying to accumulate wealth. You're spending income. They're acquiring assets. You're paying them money that's gone forever. They're collecting your money and converting it into equity and appreciation. This isn't a fair fight. It's not a negotiation between equals. It's a structural imbalance where one side has assets and the other side needs shelter. And in that imbalance, the side with assets wins. They extract wealth from the side that needs shelter. That's the system. That's why your rent keeps rising, even though your apartment hasn't changed and your income has barely budged. Your landlord isn't raising rent because they need to. They're raising it because the asset is worth more, and they're capturing that value. You deserve housing that doesn't consume half your income. You deserve the opportunity to build wealth, not just pay for someone else's. You deserve an economy where housing is abundant and affordable, where rents are tied to incomes, where appreciation doesn't mean displacement. That economy is possible. Other countries have it. Other cities have it. We can build it here. But it requires seeing the system clearly. Your landlord is doing math you're not doing. They're thinking in terms of asset values, appreciation, equity, cash flow, returns on investment. You're thinking in terms of monthly expenses and trying to survive. Start thinking like they do. Understand the game they're playing. And then fight to change the rules so that housing serves people, not investors. Because right now, you're the product. Your rent is the return. Your need for shelter is the leverage. And your landlord is getting rich while you're getting priced out. That's not natural. That's not inevitable. That's a choice, and we can choose differently. But first, you have to understand the math. Now you do. So what are you going to do about it?